Welcome to the Exceptional Sales Leader Podcast with Darren Mitchell. If you're a sales leader looking to take your leadership to a whole new level, then this is the podcast for you. We'll be exploring tips, techniques and strategies to help you take your leadership to the exceptional level and allow you to enjoy more money, more meaning and better sales results. Welcome back to the Exceptional Sales Leader Podcast, and a very special welcome to a man coming in all the way from Perth, Western Australia, albeit 3 hours behind Melbourne, Mr. Mike House. How are you, my friend?
Going well, thanks, Darren. Thanks for the invite.
I was just saying before we press record, last time we spoke, I don't know, was I on a t-shirt? I know you were, but here I am sitting with a business shirt. I got my banner in the background, and you're sitting there with a jacket and a shirt. You haven't quite got the tie, but looking very professional.
Yeah, I don't think I've worn a tie since high school.
Sorry, what's that? What was that, since high school?
I don't think I've worn a tie since high school. I tend to avoid them if I can.
Mate, I've the only time I've worn a tie is I had to with my two daughters' deb balls, right?
Right.
And even weddings, I now don't wear ties. That's for the groom and all the other groom's people, but not even funerals. I don't wear them to funerals either.
No, same.
Not good. There's just too restrictive, and having spent 20 plus years in corporate wearing them every single day, there's nothing worse than a necktie. Whoever invented them should be shot.
Indeed.
Metaphorically. So, Mike, really looking forward to this conversation. We've been connected on LinkedIn for a while. You're a mentor. You work in leadership. Have worked predominantly in not-for-profit, but the stuff we'll talk about today has equal applicability, whether you're not-for-profit or a for-profit. But a lot of the stuff we talk about is also going to be beneficial for you as an individual as well. But you've also got an interesting background. You've worked a lot in survival schools. So we're going to talk today about uncertainty and unshakability and resilience, and hopefully give the listeners some really good tips on how to build some certainty, certainly from a leadership point of view in times of uncertainty. But I always like to start with a bit of a background in terms of what got you into the role that you performed for many years working outdoors. And you share with me a couple of interesting stories about some individuals out there in the wilds of Western Australia. But then what kind of led you to transition into what you're doing today? Because that'll be the catalyst for some of the questions.
Yeah, so the short answer is there was never a plan, Darren. I was always, from a career point of view, just opening the next interesting door. I grew up in the bush and quite liked being outside, and spent a lot of time in my early career running outdoor-based programs for at-risk young people and people with disabilities. So we'd sort of take people out into the bush doing things like whitewater rafting, canoeing, bushwalking, caving, abseiling, that sort of thing, with a view to building some confidence to get into or back into work. The survival stuff came up because we had one of those programs had booked a week-long camp with the survival school prior to me taking over as the manager of that program, and I just found it fascinating. It was really interesting from a psychological point of view. You know, how do you keep yourself out of that fight or flight state and work effectively to keep yourself out of trouble and to manage the time well until you could either self-rescue or someone came along. From my point of view, I was never really fascinated with that from a long-term career point of view, but I stayed in it for 20 years because I was learning a lot about human beings, how we react under pressure. Got to test myself and others in some pretty extreme duress. You know, a big part of my job in that role was actually making life uncertain for people, and just ensuring that we stayed just on the right side of keeping them alive. But other than that, making life as challenging and as tricky as we could.
Take their water away?
Well, they start with, on our Pinnacle program, people would start with 2 litres of water and walk around about 200 Ks through the Pilbara, which for people not familiar with Western Australia, it's about 1,800 k's north of Perth. A very arid environment. There's some big river systems that have sort of widely dispersed permanent water holes, but lots of country that's very dry, very harsh. Summertime temperatures can easily get up around 50 degrees.
Wow.
So it's a pretty high consequence, very dry environment. So they'd find all their own food and water on the way, and they'd literally sleep on the ground in their clothes and things like that. So we didn't have to take water off them. We just said, go that way and good luck finding your next drink, sort of thing.
So no petrol stations to go to the fridge and get a nice Coolidge.
No, that's it. That's it. So in parallel with that work, I was running some fairly complex change projects for a fairly large not-for-profit, and I realised one day sitting on a rock in the Pilbara waiting for a group that I was actually doing very similar work, but it was push versus pull. So in the survival world, I'm pulling levers to create uncertainty, and in the change world, I was looking for how do we create alignment, how do we create certainty where there is none, how do we navigate the fact that we don't know all the answers, we've got to find them as we go. And I realised that a lot of the tools and mindsets for that were actually the same thing, and so that led to the leadership work I do now, which is sort of bringing some of those insights from that survival world into modern workplaces, and we're all surrounded by uncertainty. I often ask audiences, what could you do to create uncertainty if you're a survival instructor? And maybe that's a useful question to ask you. Just see what you would do if you put on your evil bastard hat and had to create duress and uncertainty for a group. What would be some tactics?
Well, there's a lot of things that immediately come to mind, and one of them is to limit or remove resources that people become very accustomed to and almost take for granted. And you look at things like technology or electricity, right?
Yep.
We're sitting here on Zoom. We've both got our laptops. We've got lights. We've got microphones and stuff like that. But you take for granted how much that just happens. But if you take the supply of the electricity, nothing. Well, now how are we going to communicate now, right? So for me, it'd be simple. How can I take away things that people almost take for granted, such as technology, their passes work, they go to a lift and they press a button, they expect the lift to come. How do you have to be resourceful and think when you've got nothing? You've got to rely on your instincts, if you like.
Yeah.
Do that. Yeah. That's what I'd be looking for, but I'd be also looking for how quickly people embrace it as an opportunity to learn versus the ones that complain about it and look to others to lead or blame others for their circumstance.
Yeah, so they're both great insights. The uncertainty around resources was pretty much baked in because people were starting with very little. And one of the conversations we used to often have was the difference between things that you want and things that you need.
Yeah.
What you need is actually a pretty small list most of the time, and we often get the two confused. And then that observation about how quickly do people embrace it is certainly the folks that are the most effective. And you see this crop up in any environment. It's by no means unique to survival, is the faster you can move to acceptance and to an internal locus of control. So away from a victim mindset, away from all this stuff is happening to me, to I'm in control. I choose how I respond. I get out of that fight or flight state into a reasoning and rational response to things. The faster you become effective. Now, whether you make the right choices or not, that's entirely up for grabs, and there's always lots of lessons in there. But you've taken ownership, and now you're looking at what's the best way I can show up in this moment, in this situation, with the tools and resources I have at my disposal to create the best outcome I can create. People that had that mindset are very difficult to disrupt because in essence, it's like, look, you'll do whatever you will do. The weather will do whatever it will do. Food either will or won't be there, and we'll just deal with it.
Yeah.
Whereas someone that's sort of more in that victim space would be like, oh, you're making it hard for us. We haven't got all these things we need. It's too hard. It's too terrible. We don't know where the finish line is, all of that kind of thing. And you see those patterns in everyday situations as well, where people are, I could be a great salesperson, but the economy's crap, or I'm not given the right tools by my company, or our retail outlet is on the wrong side of the tracks, or it's not fashionable anymore, or whatever the reasoning is. And there's always a lot of value in analysing some of those factors and seeing to what degree they impact results. But the really effective people are always looking at, so what can I do about that? What's my part to play in that?
Yeah.
What can I change? And if I can't change it, then what can I do to make the best of it?
It's a really good point you make. And, as you were talking, there was something that came into my brain around, and I don't know the right statistics, so I'm not going to quote any statistics, but special forces, whether it be SAS or American Special Forces, the stereotypical soldier who most people, when they look at them, would expect, oh, that person should go through because they're physical, they're big, they're built and stuff like that. But the amount of people that quit and the ones that you don't expect to get through that ultimately get through are the ones that do just as you've described. They say, okay, things are happening around my environment, but I can distinguish between the things that I can control versus the things I can't control. And then focus on what I can influence. And if I've got that choice, then I'll take the next step and I'll embrace whatever comes next.
Yeah.
So
and it's, there's some very kind of counterintuitive but valuable ways that shows up. So, some of the things that really help our psychology, regardless of the circumstances we're in, do we accept what's happening? A lot of us, it's very, very natural for us to be in denial for a period of time or wish for something different. But, how quickly can we get to acceptance? And then beyond that, are we able to find things to be thankful or grateful for, however tough it is? And that's a theme that shows up over and over again. There's a bunch of books on the bookshelf up here that are in the realm of psychology. There's a really interesting field of study that looks at what they call the survivor personality. So, if you take people and you plonk them in adversity, whether that's financial, whether it's relational, whether it's lost or stranded at sea or on land, medical diagnosis, whatever, they've kind of looked at a big range. Being in a war zone, being a prisoner of war, there's been a big range of people studied. One of the things that they find consistently is people who are able to find things that they are genuinely grateful for in the situation tend to do better than people who are just like, oh, it's all too terrible. And it seems really counterintuitive. If you're a prisoner of war, for example, what's there to be grateful for? You've got very little control. You've got an unknown end to your situation. And people find the tiniest things. It might be they saw something in the natural world that just attracted their attention and interest for a little while, or they reflect on relationships that they have back home, or the fact that they had a relatively easy day of it on this particular day. And, I kind of look at that and go, well, if people in those kinds of scenarios can find something, then for most of us in the everyday world, however tough it gets, there's probably a long list,
Oh, it is. And I mean, the most recent, the most pertinent example now is we've just had Australia Day, and Australia's year was announced, and Neil Danaher, full disclosure, I'm a Melbourne nut. He's a Melbourne Life member, but for those that are listening to this from not in Australia, Neil Danaher is an ex-AFL player, an ex-AFL coach, but also the last, over 10 years now, he's been an ambassador leading research development in MND. So he was struck down with MND, or in some cases, I think in the US they call it Lou Gehrig's disease, ALS, and stuff like that. But um, if you listen to him speak, and he's now lost the ability to speak, but he looked at this as what can I how can I make the best of what I've got? What can I be
Yeah.
grateful for, and what can I do about it?
Yeah.
Because his most famous line is, when it's all said and done, more is said than is done. And it's probably the most
Great
um
line.
it's the most powerful thing I've really heard. And when you heard him say that,
Mm.
and then lead by example through all the stuff and he knows he's got a death sentence, but he
Yeah.
continues to move forward and make, the best of a diagnosis, which is
Mm.
inevitably going to kill him.
Yeah.
So when you talk about all this, it's the resourcefulness, and you think,
Mm.
okay, what have I got gratitude for? Well, I've got gratitude that I'm here, that I can do something about it.
Yeah.
And how often do you hear people who have in dire circumstances, or they've been diagnosed with what appears to be an incurable disease, and they look back on it as a
Mm.
blessing?
Yeah.
That is counterintuitive to me. I'm
It's
thinking,
gonna,
how can you
yeah.
possibly? I wouldn't wish that upon my worst enemy, and yet somehow, some way,
Yeah.
you can say this is probably the best thing that's happened to me.
Yeah. Yeah. There was a really interesting case study of that. General Stockdale from the US, who was a prisoner of war for most of the Korea conflict. And, one of the things he was saying, he was interviewed by Collins in the book Good to Great. And, he was saying that there's this really interesting line for the people who survive and do well versus those who perish. And Collins asked him, "What's the line?" And he said, "Oh, the ones that didn't make it were the optimists." And
That's
it seemed contradictory based
yeah,
on some of the other things he said. And so Collins
yeah,
asked him about it. He said, "Well, why is that?" And he said, "Well, the optimists are, they're doing things like saying we'll be out by Christmas, and Christmas comes and Christmas goes, and there's an erosion of hope." And then Easter comes and Easter goes, and there's another erosion of hope, and Fred's birthday and someone's anniversary, and eventually he said they literally die of a broken heart.
yeah,
And he made the point, which has become known as the Stockdale paradox, which was you must confront the brutal facts of your reality, whatever they may be, but also never lose faith that you will prevail in the end, and that in hindsight, the adversity may well be the defining moment of your life.
wow,
And you kind of go, wow, that's 7 years incarcerated. He was repeatedly tortured. He was underfed. It was not a happy time. He was the most senior ranking military person in the POW camp. So he's kind of, copping a lot of it on behalf of a lot of other people as well, and that's his mindset. And you go, wow, that's there's a real interesting, for me, conflict in all of that, because your mindset at one level is super powerful. That statement is unassailable. It's like, it doesn't matter what you do to me,
yeah,
you cannot touch this.
yeah,
The challenge, I reckon, that's in there is, if you give that as a piece of advice to someone that's facing genuine adversity, whatever it is for them, it's really easy for it to sound like, I just grab a bucket of harden up and carry on. Delivered without empathy, it would be such a horrible thing to say to somebody.
oh, it would be,
And really difficult to, I know for myself, there's times where you're in that hole and intellectually you know that stuff, but
yeah,
it seems so out of reach. And if someone tells you it, even if you tell yourself, it's almost like it just fires you up, makes you angry. Oh, you don't understand. This is shit. I'm in the hole. It's horrible. But if you can access that kind of mindset, it is incredibly powerful.
and the key thing about that is, Viktor Frankl talked about the same thing, that
Yeah.
And what we're not saying is we're not saying don't be optimistic, but
No.
certainly as a leader has to be able to define the current reality.
Yeah.
What they're good at is they're able to do that and use that as a platform to
Yeah.
then move forward and think about,
Yeah.
okay, based on this current, it might be a shit sandwich, right? And I
Yeah.
can't do anything about it, but that's my reality.
Yeah.
What can I do now moving forward? So what choices do I have? What sort of
Absolutely.
mindset can I adapt that enables me to make progress? Now, it
Yeah.
may be that as a prisoner of war, we may never get out, right? That
No.
might be the brutal reality. But for the
That's it.
time that I'm here, how
Yeah.
can I be a ray of hope for others and hope that they can actually understand their reality and think about what are the choices they have
Yeah.
moment to moment, minute to minute, day to day, et cetera, et
Yeah.
cetera.
Yeah.
So because there are people out there that, as you said, get a bucket of harden up and, get on with it. It's not
Yeah.
too bad. And they
Yeah.
live in his almost, I call it the woo woo positive psychology. Everything's going to be
Yeah.
fantastic. But you
Yeah.
know what?
Just put the
Sometimes
right
life is shit.
vibration out there and everything will be great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's all well and good. And the
Yeah.
law of attraction does work and all this
Yeah.
manifestation stuff works. But
Yeah.
you've got to actually get, well, this is happening.
Yeah.
I can't do anything about it, but what can I
Yeah.
now do? What can, as
Yes.
you said before, what am I grateful for?
Yeah.
Now, it's probably going to be hard if you're incarcerated. It's probably pretty hard to turn around and say, "Well, I'm grateful for being incarcerated, eating this soup, which is actually filled with maggots,
Yeah.
um, but at least I'm getting something. So what
Yeah.
can I do?"
Yeah.
And that's where the resilience comes from.
Yeah. And look, I think, the important part with that is I talk a lot with leaders about, this is quite counterintuitive. We tend to be full tilt down the barrel of whatever the next thing on the to-do list is. And in our current reality, the transactional cadence is insane. The to-do
Mm,
list, just ping, 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 ping. And there's stuff that's going to die there and never even see the light of day. And you can be really easily drawn into a frenetic game of whack-a-mole where
yeah,
you're just belting down the next head that pops up and you're never ever kind of looking up and out. And in that space, this is very counterintuitive because it feels like slowing down. If we say, well, spend a bit of time just to,
mm,
express some thanks to the team around you and to acknowledge work well done, or to pause and have a bit of a party for the quarter's results, whatever they
yeah,
might be, or however that looks in your context.
mm,
It's counterintuitive. It's not something that will fall into the to-do list unless we very actively make space for it.
yeah,
And it's not something that has a really direct and linear link to where we want to go and the results, KPIs and goals and all those things that we're trying to reach.
mm,
The line for that stuff is a little fuzzy,
yeah,
but the overwhelming evidence is that it is so good for our psychology. It turns out, one of the things that I've found in researching that stuff is it turns out that it doesn't matter what the magnitude of the things that we're grateful for is. The impact on our psychology is about the same.
yeah,
So, I could be grateful that it was a bird singing in my garden that woke me up this morning rather than an alarm, or that I'm not currently stuck in Gaza dealing with all of that.
yeah,
The magnitude of those things is vastly different, but it turns
yeah.
out the impact on my personal psychology is about the same. So
Interesting.
often people sort of feel like it's got to be really big stuff that
Yeah,
they're looking at. It can be really simple, It's the fact that there's 3 flavours of tea in your canteen. The important piece, I reckon, is that it's got to be genuine, because we
yeah,
really, often say when I'm doing keynotes, this is, if you're kind of looking at hashtag Instaworthy, I'm so grateful, rose-coloured glasses,
yeah,
kind of gratitude, people smell that BS from 100 k's away,
absolutely.
and it feels and looks disingenuous, and it'll have the opposite effect of what you're looking for. So we've got to find whatever our own version or our team's version is of genuine stuff
Absolutely.
that works for us. So, and a lot of that comes down to culture. You look at teams like emergency response organisations, which I've done a bit of work with and for. They've often got quite a sort of dark, humorous undertone to this stuff. If you're in a sales-oriented team, it might be about opportunity, or it might be about targets, or it might be about relationships. If you're looking at people that are in some sort of development aspect of work, then perhaps it's about the richness of ideas, however valid or not they turn out to be. So it's kind of finding something that resonates for you and the team, and keeping it fresh.
Yeah.
And it has such a profound impact on us.
And I think as a leader, because people are watching our every move, and our team becomes a reflection of us.
Yeah.
We've always got to lead that and
Yes.
think about, okay, what is it that I'm grateful for? And, you can go down the path of doing a gratitude journal and write down the 5 things you're grateful for, even if it's just one thing, such as, you know what, that bird did wake me up, this morning. I've walked out to my car, and, it's a beautiful day. It's not pissing down rain, which is fantastic. How good is this?
Yeah, especially.
Well, my coffee was just the right temperature.
Yeah, yeah. Especially in Melbourne, right? Rain and cold coffee is probably...
Yeah, it's a beautiful day though, man. I've got to say, it's, mid-20s today. A little bit of a zephyr. No rain inside.
There's still time.
There is still time. Yeah, it's only, what's the time now? 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So there's still time for it to rain. Just, watch out. But the point we're making here is that as leaders, sometimes we have to have the strength to not only do that for ourselves, but almost give permission to our team to do that as well.
Yes.
Particularly in environments where a lot of corporates operate in this, the high pressure environment where the expectation is A, you get your number, B, you don't make mistakes, and C, if you do make mistakes, then there's going to be quote unquote ramifications and consequences. So it's creating that environment where it's okay to make mistakes. It's not a failure. But think about, what is the good here? What is the lesson here? What is the platform for a step forward that you can identify? And that's what you can be grateful for. And you know what? You could be grateful for that customer that was ghosting you, like you were talking about that before we pressed record. Yeah. You got a text this morning, and you didn't know that had a broken ankle, right? But all of a sudden he's texting you, say, "Hey, we're back on, let's go." And you might have been thinking, "Oh my God, what have I done?" And you could have catastrophized. I've done this.
Absolutely, It's so easy for us to do, isn't it? We fill in a narrative about whatever's happening, and a lot of the time we're not actually right.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I wanted to tap into when you're out in survival school, you're actually trying to manufacture, I guess, an environment of uncertainty and lack of resources to try and almost create not just a physical but a psychological environment to test a person's ability to think, to take action, and also manage emotions. Yeah. And then you talk about, trying to do the opposite within an organization, trying to create more certainty in a sea of uncertainty. In the survival school, I'd like to just talk first about that in terms of what have you noticed? Because you've been running these programs for many, many years. Similar to the reference back to the SAS, were there surprises, or was there people that really shocked you in terms of their ability to be naturally resilient versus like the stereotypical, I think that person is good because they look like an outdoorsy type question. Person?
Yeah. So one of the patterns that fascinated me was that, a bit like you said with special forces, the people that at face value looked as though they would do really well. So, someone turns up and they're an athlete, they're, either professional or high-end amateur, they train regularly, they're extremely fit, they're lean, they're muscular, they're focused, they're dedicated. You would think that person will absolutely kick this. They're physically capable of travelling faster than most of the people around. Yeah. Interestingly, more often than not, those kinds of people tanked. And the reason for it was twofold. So one was they became very task obsessed. So, you kind of go, right, you've got roughly 200 Ks to do in 10 days. So they've straight away gone, right, that equals 20 Ks a day. And so we've got to hit 20 a day, otherwise we're behind. And they would often drag the group with them at a pace that was unsustainable.
Yep.
And then a few days in, they're starting to get, well, you're not keeping up. That's causing fractions and tension within the group. People are, other less fit people are being driven beyond their capability, and before long, a group is only as fast as its slowest member.
Yeah, absolutely.
But one of the rules was you've got to stay together as a group. That was a
Yep.
safety requirement as much as anything else. And so they'd reached this point where they were extremely frustrated, and they would often question the dedication or the mindset of the people around them. It's like, you're not going quick like me, and you're deliberately dragging the chain. You're trying to make it hard, and that would start to do their head in. The other thing was that often those kinds of characters, where, and I've been down those rabbit holes at various points in my life. The recipe for success is that everything is tightly controlled. You're training to a schedule. You've got perhaps a month's or sometimes even years long training schedule where different elements of it are being built up over time. You're very focused on diet. You're very focused on sleep, and everything is pretty tightly controlled. And to be really successful at it, you've got to be a little bit obsessive about, following paint by numbers, really. And you're taking those people and you're plonking them in a situation where they don't have control over what's available to eat. They're not eating on the pattern that they would normally eat. Their body's perhaps letting them down or showing up in ways that they're not used to. They're probably used to high protein, high calorie, 5 or 6 times a day intake, and their body's just simply not used to operating without that level of fuel. And because they're very focused on the result, when the results aren't coming, they're in a real mental quandary of, well, I'm not performing the way that my frame of expectation was. And so now I'm kind of in this tension of I've either got to adapt or I'm going to bail, because to stay here potentially shows me up as less than what I hoped to be. So people are pulled out. If there was a group of people that pulled out, it was men or women who were in that kind of, relatively fit, relatively disciplined, sort of upper end of amateur or professional athletic endeavour. By contrast, one of the most unshakable people I ever had on a course was a 68-year-old Swedish grandmother.
Wow.
She would do Tai Chi every day. She'd be, out there doing a thing. And the group around her would be kind of at a fever pitch as we would be throwing in these little challenges and bits of incomplete information designed to kind of shake the cage a little bit. And she would go, that's their job, is to make life hard for us. They will do what they will do. They've told us to sit here for 3 hours, so why don't we enjoy where we are? Don't worry about what's next. And you just could not disrupt that, because she was, it's a bit like that Bruce Lee quote, be the water, She's just kind of like, whatever, I'll just roll with it. And she was probably one of the slowest in terms of overall walking pace people that I've ever seen, but she pretty much crossed the finish line in an exact same mental and physical state as she was when she started. Wow. Whereas a lot of other people, they really degrade themselves because they're pushing hard into their physical and mental reserves, and they're having these big spikes of fatigue or blood sugar issues or dehydration or whatever. She was so even keeled the whole way through. Wow. And incredibly generous with how she supported people around her.
Nice.
And it was a real lesson. It's kind of like, wow, you're pretty much unassailable, and as a result, the group around you is much less disruptable. And so I think that's a big piece when it comes to how can we lead in an uncertain environment in a way that creates certainty for ourselves and the team.
Mm.
A lot of that a lot of the time we don't have control over the circumstances. It's like the
No.
economy will do what it will do. The trends that are happening will do what they will do. Right now we're just a handful of days into Trump into his second presidential term in the US.
Yeah.
There's going to be big impacts from that globally, and depending on which commentators you listen to, that's going to be absolutely disastrous or quite magical. There's so much uncertainty around, and for most of us in our lives and in our businesses, we have very little control or influence over any of that. Those big picture themes will do what they will do.
Yeah.
And so the certainty we can create is more about, how do you and I make decisions? How do we resolve conflict? How do we adapt our targets if we need to do that? What are the things that we celebrate, and how do we celebrate them? How do we actively learn together? How do we create safety for you or I to go, hang on a minute, that doesn't seem quite right. Can we explore that a bit further?
Yeah.
We can create incredible certainty around how we be together, that alongside the doing that we have to do, the transactional stuff that we're there for, the pieces that we have to achieve.
Yeah.
Those two things combined become much less disruptable. If we're constantly looking out at this is happening, that's unpredictable, this might come over the hill, then we're always looking for some sort of external reference for our certainty, and that will never come. We might have periods of relative stability and periods of relative instability, but to look externally for certainty, whether that's as an individual or as a team or as a business, I think is an exercise in folly, because you very easily just end up getting led around by the nose ring by whatever's happening next.
We become very reactionary, don't we?
Yeah, become way too reactive and really easily disrupted. The other side of that is where our identity is placed. So, you see a lot of people where the results or the job description are heavily tied to my sense of who I am and my worth.
Or the title.
Yeah. And, again, that's really disruptable, because if we have to change, we go, right, we're restructuring and that job doesn't exist anymore, but we need you over here and your skill set we think would be good. And, if all my identity and self-worth eggs are in the basket of the title that I've had for the last couple of years, then that becomes a major challenge to overcome. Again, we can have a focus around how do we together and individually achieve the best we can achieve, and let's not get too hung up on, obviously we need clarity about roles and who's where and all that. Let's not get too hung up on that stuff.
Yeah.
I think it's one of the real beauties of for-purpose organisations. KPI, especially now in the current sort of funding environment, KPIs and financial performance and all of that is more important than it's ever been. It's a much more competitive environment than it's ever been, but still underlying all of that is whatever the purpose of the organisation is.
Yeah.
And the not-for-profits that do that well are very anchored by that. So, around them can be a boiling sea of unknown, but it's like, this is what we're about. This is why we're here. This is why we show up for work. This is the difference we make. And in my view, you can create that regardless of what your business is. Too many people get lazy with that and go, well, our objective, what's the purpose? The purpose is profit for shareholders or money into the owner's bank account or get the quarterly bonus.
Totally.
So that's not your purpose. That's an outcome. So what are you there for?
Yeah.
And the clearer that stuff is, the easier it is to build that sense of cohesion and results for the team that becomes less afflicted by the variability in the world around us.
Absolutely. And I love the points you made, and going back to the example of the 68-year-old Swedish grandmother.
Yeah.
She was she knew who she was, right?
Yes.
So she focused on, well, I'm here now, so I'm going to be here
Yeah.
now and be
Yeah.
present now, right?
Yeah.
And so you mentioned that a lot of us focus on the doing, so very task focused, KPI driven, and you've got to have that in business, whether it's for
Absolutely.
profit, not for profit, for purpose, whatever.
Yeah.
But a lot of leaders in particular don't necessarily spend as much time on the question, who do I need to be today?
Yeah.
Who do I need to be for my team? Who do I need to be for my customer? Who do I need to be for my family?
Yeah.
And if you can build some consistency around that,
Yeah.
then you're going to be better equipped to handle anything that's thrown at you, because what that creates is it creates a sense of certainty in yourself that you
Yes.
can handle any uncertainty that is presented to you. And
Yes.
then if you understand you're an example of the people that are around you and you're
Mm.
responsible for, they might be really uncertain. They might be really anxious about what's happening in the marketplace. There might be people who are right now thinking, oh my God, Trump's going to change the world, and all of a sudden I can't be myself. Well, focus on what you do have control over. And if you're working for a leader who is absolutely certain about themselves and they can create a level of certainty for you, then the
Yeah.
doing part doesn't become easy, but it becomes a little bit easier because you know who you are.
Yes. Yeah. I think it's more robust, and if we have to change it,
Mm,
the change becomes less disruptive.
mm,
One of the things I run a few workshops that are about the mechanics of change and some of the sort of hidden human variables behind the change process that hold us up. Things that get in the way, and I often hear it said that human beings are just really bad at change, and I think it's one of the biggest pieces of garbage that has been visited upon the world in recent times. Because all we've ever been about as a species is change. If we were
yeah,
crap at change, we'd still be living in caves and
that's
lighting
right.
fires with flints and hunting with.
Having sword fights.
Yeah, exactly. But we don't do that. We have this sense of restlessness and urgency around how can I make things better, easier, faster,
Mm,
more efficient, and that's the absolute engine room of our evolution as a species, and all the incredible stuff that we're capable of.
yeah,
There's some fantastic examples around the world unfolding as we speak about where are some of those cutting edges that seem so ridiculously out there. It's like that's a figment of someone's imagination that they've literally grabbed by the scruff of the neck and they're dragging it into reality. So humans are great at change. Where we're not so good is when we feel like we've got no control over it.
yeah,
And I think this little distinction between be and do and attachment to title and KPI and stuff like that it's often quite subtle, but it's the difference between we're relatively impervious to that stuff outside, and we can adapt as much as we need to without it derailing us,
yeah.
which
So,
is fantastically powerful. It brings out the
oh, it
best
is.
in people.
And certainly from a leadership point of view, we need to have that in our kit bag, in our DNA.
Yeah,
So if we look at 2025, and there's a lot of stuff happening, you just mentioned the election in the US.
yeah,
There'll be an election in Australia, and there might be some state elections coming through. There's going to be a lot of continual uncertainty. And if, as we're recording this in late January, there's been a lot of people really scared by the Chinese AI platform
yeah,
DeepSeek that has
yeah,
just been released, and what that might have in terms of impact on AI and the race for AI. So that adds another level of complexity.
yeah.
So in the work that you do, Mike, working with organizations and helping them through change and helping them become more resilient, being unshakable, are there some themes or some things top of mind that you're working specifically on in your space that's going to help people become a little bit more, not so much confident, but a bit more
Yeah.
certain with the environment that we're going into?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that I think are carrying really well into our current environment. So one is I've been doing a program that's focused around creating really robust mentoring skills for leaders in organisations, and that's really about how do we. It's a response to the transactional pressure where you don't have to go back too far in time to see that most of the time we had somewhere around an hour a week or fortnight for every staff person in our team to do some form of supervision, setting targets, solving problems, bit of feedback, all that kind of stuff. And that's becoming increasingly threatened. There's just not the bandwidth to allocate that much time to it. And the issue showing up particularly strongly in not-for-profits, but I don't think they're orphans in it, where there's a concern among a lot of leaders that there's becoming a separation between what are we doing on the front line and how well does that stack up against our expectations, where we want to set the bar and how we want things to be. So that mentoring program's really helping people to develop skills to step into and speak into moments where a steadying hand is needed, or where some encouragement to carry on doing something that's really effective or good is coming through, or to apply a bit of corrective action if needed. And to be able to do that quite quickly and on the fly as the moments present themselves. And, by all means, you can do longer burn stuff, but that's creating some of that certainty and stability for people in organisations, because if you do that well, what you're reinforcing is what does good look like for us and how do we keep doing that? And it also helps to keep our attention on, what are the pieces that we can directly control and influence, and to just push back some of that clutter that, we absolutely, as rational and reasonable human beings, we should be paying attention to many of those things that you listed and mentioned, but it's kind of an exercise in futility to be losing sleep over them as well. So that's quite useful stuff. And then the other piece that we're doing is my first book, Thrive and Adapt, that red one there, was really the synthesis of that survival work and the change management work that I was doing, and it really focuses around personal resilience skills. So how do you be the most adaptable version of yourself that you can? So a heap of stuff in there about mindset and some very tactical stuff to get clarity, presence and focus in whatever the moment you're facing is, and particularly dealing with some of the abrupt transitions that happen. And, that was written back in 2017, but there's it's almost experiencing a bit of a resurgence at the moment, where I think we're sort of losing the love a little bit for some of that sort of more long-form, fluffy mindfulness kind of stuff, and looking for, some of that's great stuff. It's not a criticism of it at all. But I think there's a real appetite for, okay, so when my back's to the wall and things aren't what I expect, how can I do this in a really practical way? And that's very much what those programs are about. So, I'm finding a lot of the clients that I'm speaking with across sectors, as you said, not-for-profits really one of the areas I focus deeply into, but I also do a lot of work with mining companies in WA and small privately owned companies and government departments, state and federal, and education and emergency response organisations. It's pretty diverse. That those themes seem to be holding true across the board. I think the reality is that, AI is certainly a big one. We're going to see backlash to some more right-leaning views with Trump in power. All of those things will have an impact on, how we do human resourcing, on what jobs look like. There's already a bunch of stuff that's very effectively being done by AI. That's a bit of an unknown runway. I'm certainly no tech expert. I wouldn't want to speculate on how far that can or will go. But it's certainly going to be disruptive, even if all it does is forces us to ask the question, So I think some of that, for me, I would be doubling down on what's the underlying purpose behind our organisation, what gets us out of bed in the morning, why should we show up, what about what we do is essential to the world, or at least our little group, our little tribe within it. Double down on that, get really, really good at that. We should always, as humans, I think, be asking how can we adapt and change? How can we get better, faster, more efficient? Use the tools that are at our disposal well. Look at things with a bit of a critical mind. I think there's never been certainly in our lifetime, an era where it's more sensible just not to go with the flow. To sort of pause and go, well, what do I actually think about that?
Yeah.
What is my or our position on that? How might it impact our reality? And find the best of what you do and really major in that, I think.
Yeah. So double down on the skill set that is your zone of genius or in your swimming lane and get really good at that. But also don't lose sight of the fact that certainly as a leader, we are examples to our people,
Yeah.
whether that be people who are directly reporting to us at work or we influence at the soccer club or the footy club or cricket club or certainly our family as well. And remember that people won't necessarily do what you tell them, they'll do what they see.
Yes.
And if you can set the good example, which means your perceptive skills, your ability to look at things for what they are and not project anything in terms of meaning. It is what it is.
Yeah.
Based on that, what am I going to do about it? What
Yeah.
can I do about it? I think the key message out of this conversation, Mike, and it's been a great one, so I thank you for that, is
Pleasure.
we're always going to have change happening in our environments, some of which might be a little bit in our control, but a lot of which will not be in our control. And irrespective of that, we need to be able to maintain a level of certainty in ourselves that no matter what is thrown at us, we have the resources to be able to deal with it. It doesn't mean we'll find the perfect solution, but at least we'll be able to make it mean something, make it mean something to somebody else, be able to express it, and then focus on what do we have control over to move
Yeah.
forward. So,
Yeah. Perfect. Great summary, I reckon, Darren. I think it really is more important than ever. It's, no doubt it's going to be a fairly topsy-turvy ride for the next little while at least until some of this stuff settles down.
I think so, but I think it's also exciting at the same time, and I guess
Totally.
it means what you're choosing to focus on. Right? You're going to choose to focus on, hey, this is going to be a really interesting, curiosity based sort of environment that we're moving into, or are you looking at it as if, oh my God, I wish it was 1985?
Yeah, that's it. So I
So
think there's a
Mike,
couple of things we can do practically there as well, Darren, because that what we've just said is not a nice concept and intellectually really understood, easy to understand. But there's also the question, what do we do? So
yeah,
two things I'd be particularly focused on. One is a game that I call the interpretation game. So, if I find myself locking into a point of view about what something means or the significance of something, if I can pause and just say, okay, what other interpretations are there possible for that? So, what did that person mean by what did they say, what they said,
yeah,
what's actually happening here? Looping back to our sales conversation before, what are the other things that could be happening for that person that mean
yeah,
he's not ghosting me? Doing that at big and small levels is really useful. Call it the interpretation game, and the more
yeah, love it.
possibilities you can generate, the more flexible our mindset can be. And then the second thing is, I think it's really important for us to explore outside of our little bubble. It's in our current world, it's very easy to live in a bit of an echo chamber where the algorithm serves us up with views that confirm our own biases. So, go deliberately looking for people where you'll disagree, and especially if it's intelligent commentary, and then, lean into it and see what they've got to say. I think that's a really useful thing to do to get a more balanced view. We're certainly in an era where it's very easy to get galvanised into just black and white opposing camps, and
That's it.
with the level of uncertainty we've got, I don't think that's particularly helpful.
I think it's a great piece of advice and a great way to finish, mate. The only other question I've got for you is people listening to this. Well, two things. One, where can they connect with you? And
Yep.
secondly, where can they get access to the two books that are sitting on your shelf behind you? One called Thrive and Adapt, the other one called Unshakable.
Yes, so the answer to both questions is probably pretty similar. So the books are available on my website, and that's just mikehouse.com.au. And I'm also on LinkedIn. My profile there is the Mike House. So because there's a few,
one and only.
Yeah, there's a few Mike Houses there, so I call myself the Mike House. So connect with me there. Both of those places have my email and phone contacts. So if people want to touch base and have a conversation, they'd be more than welcome.
Awesome. And hashtag real.
Yeah, that's right.
Awesome, mate. Thanks for jumping on the podcast. It's been a phenomenal conversation, and we didn't get to talk about your yachting adventure up in the Whitsundays. So if we don't talk before that, I wish you and your wife the best of adventures up there for your wedding anniversary, which is the 30th.
That's it, yeah. So looking forward to that. I know I don't look old enough to be doing a 30th wedding anniversary, but unfortunately it's true.
Well, we were talking about that before, weren't we? That both of us are having 30th wedding anniversaries in March. I think we're a few weekends away.
That's right. Yeah.
So, mate, it's been an absolute pleasure. And, mate, thanks again for being a guest on the Exceptional Sales Leader podcast.
Great pleasure, Darren. Thanks heaps for the invite. And, yeah, go well with your anniversary as well. And look forward to continuing the conversation in other places.
Awesome. Thanks, mate.
Great. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to the Exceptional Sales Leader podcast. I trust the information in this episode has been helpful in your journey towards becoming exceptional. And remember, please take the time to rate the show, subscribe to the show so other people can find it. But also, if I can help you, jump on my calendar, go to leadwithdarren.com and let's have a conversation about how I can help you along your journey to being exceptional.